Please welcome a most thoughtful leader who I believe has served brilliantly in the most demanding assignments in peace and war, General Martin Dempsey.
Well, I know that was very polite, but you really ought to wait to hear what I have to say before you decide if you're going to clap or not. I'm back here for the second year in a row, and honored as much as I was last year. Last year I came not fully appreciating, I think, what this event means for our Army. And my guess is you probably don't completely appreciate what this event means for our Army, but you are the best of the programs you represent, 273 or so of our best and brightest young men and women of America who are about to join, in some cases have already been part of the United States Army, and you will now do the nation's calling to protect us and promote our interests around the world. And you volunteered to do so at a time when you knew with full conviction that we would place you in harm's way. And so that makes you a very extraordinary group of young men and women. I was working out this morning watching SportsCenter. I apologize that it wasn't the McNeil-Lehrer report or CNN or something, but it was SportsCenter, and they were waxing eloquent about the NFL draft next Friday, speculating about where Bradford and Clausen, McCoy, and Tebow would end up to quarterback their NFL teams. And it occurred to me that I was about to come over here and speak to young men and women who will quarterback the most important teams that our nation will field in the next 10 or 15 years. So for those of you that are here admiring them, let's give them a round of applause. That wasn't it didn't sound very much, but it was heartfelt. There's not many of us, actually. So, when I graduated from West Point in 1974, of course, that's now 35, almost 36 years ago, but think about the number 35. So if I backed up and thought about being a senior at West Point, or in your case, a senior in ROTC program, if I backed up from where I started, 35 years would have been the class of 1939. And if you think about what someone, from your history lessons, if you think about what someone experienced from 1939 to 1974, what I've experienced from 1974 now to 2010, it can seem almost overwhelming what you might experience between 2010 when you graduate and 2045. Which is when you will be where I am in my career. But there is a certain continuity to it all. Let me read something here to you. Superintendent, I take pleasure in greeting you as colleagues in the service of the United States. You will find, as I have, that service never ends. In the sense that it engages the best of your ability and the best of your imagination in the endless adventure of keeping the United States safe, strong, and at peace. You will find that technique you acquired can be used in many ways for your country. For the Army of the United States has a record of achievement in peace and in war. With us, the Army does not stand for aggression, domination, or fear. It has become an elite corps of highly trained men and women whose talent is great technical skill, whose training is highly cooperative, and whose capacity is used to defend the country with force when affairs require that force be used. But it has also been made available to organize, to assist, and to construct when battles have to be waged against the more impersonal foes of disaster, disease, or distress. And that was the part of the address that Franklin Delano Roosevelt gave to the class of 1939 at West Point. Anticipating, of course, what he thought they might face in their next 35 years of service. By the way, I'm not signing you up for 35 years of service. But just in case, it makes the point, I think. Let me read something else to you. If you Google, not that any of you ever use the Internet, but if you do Google from time to time, Google 1935, 1974, and 2010. and listen to the similarity in world events. 1939, Germany occupies Czechoslovakia. 1974, U.S. exits Vietnam. 2010, responsible drawdown in Iraq and surge in Afghanistan. 1939, earthquake in Chile kills 30,000. 1974, cyclone in Australia and Darwin kills tens of thousands. 2010, Haitian earthquake kills more than 200,000. 1939, terrorist bombing in Coventry, England. 1974, terrorist bombing in England and jetliner crash due to terrorism in Greece. 2010, foiled terrorist plot in New York City. 1939, USA recovering from the Great Depression. 1974, Franklin National Bank collapse. 2010, U.S. recovering from Great Recession. 1939, NBC televises the World's Fair opening ceremonies. 1,000 viewers used 200 experimental television sets. 1974, 20 million people watch All in the Family, rated the #1 show in America. 2010, three-dimensional televisions hit the market. 1939, a Boeing B-17 purchased for $238,000 each. 1974, a Boeing B-1 bomber purchased for $283 million apiece. 2010, the MQ-1C Sky Warrior Predator purchased for $100 million apiece. 1939, 15 million landline phones in the United States. 1974, the Japanese begin testing the cell phone. 2010, 285 million wireless phones in the United States. And by the way, our population is just over 300 million. That kind of continuity is predictable. You will face security threats. The Army will be asked to do things that we can't even conceive it being asked to do. And that kind of continuity in the pace of technological change is also predictable. I predict you and your soldiers will learn differently in your career, far differently than I learned in mine. So let's talk for a minute about what's new and what's not new. What's not new? Because that's as important as what is new. What's not new? We live up to the traditions. We work to earn the trust and confidence and the honor of service by the American people. We are a service, values-based organization. That has never changed. That will never change. And as we pass the mantle to you, you must commit to ensure that it never changes. A couple of names to remember and, again, to potentially research. Rick Rescorla. If you've read the book We Were Soldiers Once and Young, or seen the movie We Were Soldiers Once and Young, you'll know that Rick Rescorla is the soldier pictured in his full battle gear with fixed bayonet on day 2 of the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley in Vietnam. And the picture on the front of the book is very telling about how he feels about his mission that day. He's been asked to go into the brush to help determine what the Vietnamese army was about to try to do to him. And the picture, if you look back at it, and I encourage you to do so, is the picture of several kind of things in tension with each other. There's his commitment to the mission. There's fear. There's incredible pressure of being a leader in combat, leading men. And there's great courage. Young men and women are only willing to leave the safety of their homes, the safety of a foxhole, the safety of a bunker, the safety of a crater, and move into those kind of conditions and conditions that are unknown and uncertain. If they have confidence in themselves, if they believe in the values they represent, if they have confidence in the man and woman or woman to their left or right, and if they know that there's a little Verizon network behind them that is ensuring that they've got the doctrine right, the organization right, the equipment right, and the family support right. And that will never change. We are service-based and values-based, and we must remain and we must continue to struggle at times to maintain that service and values base. Sam Damon, this is a fictional character. If you haven't ever read We Were Once an Eagle by Anton Meyer. You must read it at some point. It was made into a movie, but the movie, as usual, didn't live up. Now remember, I got my master's in English from Duke, so you knew I was going to say this, that the movie never lived up to the potential of the book. But the point is, in this book, there's contrasting leadership styles. There's a leader who is extraordinarily talented by the name of Courtney Massingale, but he's also extraordinarily ambitious. And he will, given the chance to do so, achieve rank and achieve stature by crawling over his subordinates, not by developing them, not by standing on their shoulders. And then there's a character by the name of Sam Damon. He's the more exemplary character, as you will come to conclude. He cares deeply about his soldiers, cares deeply about his profession. And at one point, at the end of the book, he's talking to a protege. He's at the end of his career, and a protege says to him, you know, at that time he's General Damon. He says, General Damon, how do I become a good officer? And Sam Damon says, well, look, let me put it this way. If it ever comes to a choice between being a good person or a good officer, be a good person. Because that's what being good leaders is about, being good people. And that will never change. So there's two things now that I've suggested to you must never change. The other one is that we're a profession that's built on trust. Again, it's that image of what causes young men and women to willingly put themselves in harm's way. They have to trust you. You have to trust you. You have instincts. If you're here today, you have already demonstrated that you have instincts far beyond your peers at this point in their development. Continue to develop that. Continue to find ways to build trust inside of your organizations, so that the young men and women who are serving below you and those adjacent to you and those above you know that your interests are in the best interest of those who you serve and in the unit in which you serve. Establish that trust, and when it comes time for you to ask someone to do something very difficult, then they'll do it. And the last thing is the fundamentals will never change. You know, our Army has been asked to do many, many things. As you've seen, disaster relief. In Baghdad in 2003, we came up with the acronym SWET, S-W-E-T, sewer, water, energy, and trash removal. Because at that time, that was the mission. We had to restore a sense of civility and a sense of stability to Baghdad. You're going to be asked to do the same thing. Armies and those that populate them and leaders who lead them can and must be prepared to do a lot of things. That's what we mean by versatile and adaptable. But at the end of the day, we must never lose the skills required to do the one thing that an army does uniquely for the country, and that is to deliver lethal effects if it becomes necessary to do so, or as Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, the capacity to defend the country with force when affairs require that force be used. And so as you have gone through this seminars this week and as you've read about your profession and thought about your profession, I suspect at times it seems a little unclear what we really want you to do at the point where you find yourself in your career. Let me clear it up for you. Master your weapon system, whatever that weapon system has to be. And I mean master it. There's a great book by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers, who talks about how does someone become a master of his trade. Your trade is leadership. You become a master of your trade, Malcolm Gladwell says, after 10,000 hours of practice. If you do the math, 10,000 hours of practice is about a decade. Master your weapon system in a way that causes you to have confidence in it, confidence in its employment, and so you can be within your formation an expert on it. If you're a tanker, then you better be the best damn tanker that ever strapped it on. If you're an infantryman, you better be able to hit what you aim at. And your soldiers better know that if you're the guy on their flank, you can deal with what comes your way. The second fundamental, it seems to me, is small unit tactics. Sometimes in the effort to become experts in other things outside of strictly military affairs, we might shortchange ourselves in the time we spend on tactics. Don't let that happen. You have to understand fire and maneuver. You have to understand the integration of direct and indirect fire. You have to understand how to structure an engagement area. You have to know how to commit a reserve. You have to understand how to use terrain, because we are the force that conducts military operations on land. So you have to understand time-distance factors. You have to understand intervisibility lines. You have to be the masters of small unit tactics on the ground, where people live and where the enemy tends to populate. The third thing is you need to understand, as a fundamental, the relationship with your non-commissioned officers. You have heard time and time again that the NCOs are the backbone of our Army, and they are. So I won't repeat that cliche. But we should never take that for granted. And you should never just assume that you and your non-commissioned officer are going to partner. You have to work at that. It's back to that issue of trust. It's back to that issue of commitment and confidence. It's back to that 10,000 hours to become the expert. But your non-commissioned officers have to understand you, and you have to understand them, and that's fundamental. And I was out speaking at the Sergeant Major's Academy, and I was giving them a very what I thought was a very uplifting speech. Told them how wonderful they are. Told them they were the backbone of the Army. And the Commandant of the Sergeant Major's Academy, his name is Sergeant Major Ray Chandler, pulled me aside afterwards and said, "You got to stop doing that." I said, "Stop doing what?" He said, "You got to stop pumping sunshine in their ear." He didn't say ear. And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because they're getting complacent. They're starting to believe it. They're starting to believe that they're that good." I said, "I got the message." So, get to know your non-commissioned officers. They'll get to know you. It has to be a team. And the last thing is you got to fall in love with soldiers. You will. Let yourself do that. You have to care for them. You have to care for them. You got to care for them on duty. You got to care for them off duty. You got to be committed to their development. Somebody has to develop you. You have to develop somebody else. That's the way it works in our service. That's the way it must work. That's fundamental. That list of things I just described are what must not change, no matter how busy you get. So let me talk a little bit about what is new and is changing, and then I'll ask you for your questions. By the way, your reputation as a group this week is that you ask very good questions. So there's a little pressure on you now, and I'll be back to you in a minute. What is new? The degree to which we have decentralized capabilities, responsibilities, and authority to you. When I was the commander of the 1st Armored Division in 2003, I had most of the capability resident at my echelon. And I would give it out as I needed to weight main efforts, or to accomplish certain tasks, or to thicken the ranks in one part of Baghdad or another. But most of the capabilities were mine. Those capabilities have now been habitually and organizationally moved to the edge. So a captain at a combat outpost on the Afghan-Pakistan border has as much capability today as a battalion commander did 5 or 6 years ago. And a brigade combat team commander has more capability than a division commander did 5 or 6 years ago. That decentralization causes a couple of things to occur. More capability, more authority. It also causes us to think about how we are migrating risk to the edge. You have to enter in a way that I never did, into a dialogue with your chain of command about the conditions you find on the ground. Actually, the truth is, division commanders will get more important information from you from the bottom up than they'll get from anybody else from the top down. That's a paradigm shift. When I was a division commander, most of the information I expected to receive from echelons above me. Information and intelligence. Today, we co-create the context in which we operate. We co-create it. You'll get some information and intelligence from above. You'll provide information and intelligence from what you see. And in the co-creation of context, we'll understand how to employ the military instrument of power. That's an enormous responsibility. The fact that you are creating the context in which our military operations will either succeed or fail. That's new. What else is new? Transparency. We live in a transparent world. My guess is that this speech will be on YouTube within an hour after I'm done. It will. It ended up there last year. I'm okay with that, by the way, because once you realize that, you understand what to do about it. And in some ways, that transparency lends itself to the kind of information and knowledge sharing that heretofore was just unimaginable. But you live in a transparent world. You've grown up in it. So actually, for you, this is not, you're probably sitting there thinking, that's not new. Well, so let me put it this way. What's new for me is the degree to which we exist in a transparent world. Just understand that. I used to tell my soldiers in Iraq that you take your families to war with you. General P remembers when we were in Desert Storm together, we communicated with our families, this is hard to believe, I know, by handwritten mail. And so I probably exchanged letters with my wife maybe 10 or 12 times in 6 months. And I think I got to call her once, maybe twice, and that was only after a very arduous task of trying to find the phone bank in the middle of the desert north of Kuwait City. Today, your soldiers are emailing, calling, Twittering, Facebooking, and some of them are linked in with their families on a daily, hourly basis, and will routinely communicate with them before they go on a patrol and right after they come back. Now, there was a time when those of us over the age of 35, well over the age of 35, thought that the right answer would to be try to block that all. It's impossible. And actually, we've come to the realization, as I know you have, it's not a good idea either. The key is to empower families to be supportive of their soldiers by reaching out to them in any way you can. But that's different as well. The pace of change is just remarkable. I would suggest to you that the way we learn, not the way the connections are made in the brain literally, but the way we learn and have access to learning changed dramatically 2 years ago. iPhone, Android, iPad, and whatever son of iPad becomes mean that now learning occurs anywhere, everywhere, on the move, personal content, and it's all about the applications. Training and Doctrine Command, as we evolve, are beginning to think of ourselves as the application store. Because the question in the future will be, okay, I know you want me to learn that. Is there an app for it? And there will be. That's a learning environment in which you will command. And so that's new, and you have to deal with it. The last different new thing to me that I want you to take on board is competitiveness. You know, when General P and I and General Bartell and those of us of our generation were growing up in the Army, we had a near-peer competitor called the Warsaw Pact. And we measured ourselves against that near-peer competitor in terms of numbers of systems, throw weight of artillery and carrier battle groups and nuclear weapons. And it was mostly about the arithmetic, attrition-based models of throw weight. And it was a single near-peer competitor. And so the world just essentially was a hell of a lot easier to understand. And the competitiveness existed between two major world powers. The reason I describe the world today as competitive is that those capabilities that heretofore were in the purview of nation states are now in the hands of adversaries, whether they be terrorist groups, narco-terrorists, militias, or nation states. And so we enter into environments, whether we enter in a peacekeeping operation, a counterinsurgency, some other irregular threat, or a traditional conflict, it is a far more competitive security environment. What happens if you think your competition is raising its game? Then you best raise your game. And one other thought. If we exist in a competitive security environment, then the domain in which we must prevail, the one in which we must prevail, is the competitive learning environment. You and me and all of us have to learn better, have to learn faster, and have to adapt quicker to stay ahead in a competitive learning environment. And that's your challenge, and that's a new challenge as well. So let me end by, if I haven't completely depressed you, let me end by, actually, if I were you, I'd be excited. You know, if you're not excited, let me know. But if I were you, I'd be excited. Because you've achieved so much. The potential for you to achieve so much more is right in front of you. The country needs you, and it's nice to be needed, isn't it? And so I'd be excited about all this if I were you. So let me thank you for your service. that which you've already performed, because I see a lot of right shoulder patches in the room, that which you are about to perform. And let me also ask you to pass on to your families my appreciation for their support, because you've got to have that little Verizon network I described. And I know you've got it, or you wouldn't be where you are right now. Let me leave you with a quotation. And this isn't a military quotation. We tend to like to quote dead military leaders. But in breaking with that tradition, let me leave you with a quotation by the founder of Google, who, in trying to inspire his subordinates, said, let me give you this one piece of advice. Never settle. Never settle. Keep reaching. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless America.